What if the reason you still feel stuck is not because you're lazy, inconsistent, or doing healing wrong? What if part of the reason you feel stuck is because you have spent years carrying pressure, adapting to expectations, holding everything together, and surviving in ways that taught your body to stay alert or responsible and disconnected from its own needs? For many women of color, stuckness is not just personal, it is layered with what you were taught to carry, layered with who you learned to be in order to be accepted, layered with how often you had to stay strong, stay composed, stay useful, stay quiet, or stay in control just to make it through. So if you have been blaming yourself because you know better but still cannot seem to fully shift, I want to offer you a different possibility. Maybe you're not failing. Maybe you're trying to create change from inside a pattern that was built for survival. Welcome back to the podcast. This is Her Evolution Solutions. I am your host, Melissa Laura, and I am so glad that you're here. Today we're talking about why so many women, especially women of color, still feel stuck even when they're trying so hard to heal, grow, change, and move differently. If you have ever said to yourself, I know too much to still be here, or why do I keep circling the same lesson, or why do I still feel disconnected from myself even though I am doing the work? This episode is for you because sometimes the issue is not a lack of desire. Sometimes the issue is that your body, your patterns, and even your identity has been shaped by survival, pressure, emotional labor, and the deep conditioning to keep going no matter what. And if that has been your reality, then it makes sense that change would feel more complex than just trying harder. So today, I want to talk about the deeper pattern underneath stuckness, especially for the women who look high functioning on the outside but still feels tired, overwhelmed, disconnected, or emotionally overloaded underneath it all. Let's start with what this often feels like. You know you want something different. You may want more peace, more self-trust, more honesty, more ease in your body, more consistency, more boundaries, more rest, more alignment, more room to be fully yourself without feeling like everything will fall apart. And you're not passive about it. You're trying. You may be reading, reflecting, praying, journaling, learning, starting over, setting intentions, trying to be more aware of your patterns, trying to speak up more, trying to choose yourself more, trying not to abandon yourself again. And still, something feels hard to fully shift. You may not know what needs to change, but it is time to act. You may not know what needs to change, but when it is time to act, you freeze. You overthink, you go quiet. You talk yourself out of it. You tell yourself now is not the right time. You shrink in moments when you know you want to speak. You keep carrying what you know is too much. You stay in roles that exhaust you. You default to being the strong one, the dependable one, the one who can handle it, even while feeling disconnected from yourself. And what makes it especially painful is that many women of color are used to being seen as capable, used to being the one who figures it out, used to being praised for endurance, used to being needed, used to being the one who adapts. So when you're struggling internally, it can be harder to name, harder to admit, harder to even validate. Because on paper, maybe you are functioning. You are working, showing up, taking care of people, meeting responsibilities, holding things together. But inside, you may feel tired in a way that sleep does not fix, disconnected in a way that productivity hides, alone in ways people do not see because you have gotten so good at appearing fine. And this is where a lot of women get trapped because now the stuckness becomes shame. It is not just that you are struggling. Now you're judging yourself for struggling. Now you're asking why you cannot just do what you know. Now you're treating your pain like a personal flaw. But here's what I want you to hear. Stuckness is not always a sign that you are uncommitted. Sometimes it is a sign that you are moving inside a deeper pattern than the one you're blaming yourself for. Now let's talk about what may actually be happening underneath this. A lot of women have been taught to interpret themselves through pressure. If you're tired, push harder. If you are overwhelmed, get more organized. If you keep hesitating, be more confident. If you are inconsistent, be more disciplined. If you are emotionally affected, toughen up. But for many women of color, this pressure is not only personal, it is also cultural, relational, and inherited. A lot of women of color were not taught to slow down and ask, what do I need? They were taught to handle it, to be strong, to help, to make things work, to not make too much trouble, to read the room, to stay composed, to be grateful, to not fall apart, to keep moving even when something inside them was asking for care. And when you live in that kind of pattern long enough, your body adapts. It learns how to brace, it learns how to anticipate, it learns how to stay useful, it learns how to override needs, it learns how to survive approval, disappointment, conflict, silence, pressure, over responsibility, and emotional labor. So now, even when you consciously want change, there still may be parts of you organized around protection. That matters. Because sometimes what looks like inconsistency is actually a body that does not yet feel safe. Sometimes what looks like procrastination is actually overwhelm. Sometimes what looks like people pleasing is a deeply practiced survival response. Sometimes what looks like self doubt is a result of years of being taught not to trust your own voice before everyone else's comfort. And sometimes what looks like being stuck is the exhaustion of trying to build a new life while carrying old patterns that were never named for what they were. This is why insight alone does not always create change. You can know the pattern and still feel pulled by it. You can understand boundaries and still freeze when someone is disappointed. You can want rest and still feel guilty when you slow down. You can want visibility and still feel your body tense when it is time to be fully seen. Because sometimes the issue is not that you do not know. Sometimes the issue is that your system still associates change with risk. And for women of color, that risk can be layered. The risk of disappointing family, the risk of being misunderstood, the risk of being called selfish, the risk of being seen as difficult, the risk of no longer being the version of yourself other people depend on, the risk of laying down strength before you feel held enough to do it. So, no, this is not just about personal motivation. Sometimes this is about survival, identity, and the cost of being shaped by pressure for too long. Now, let's talk about this pattern. Now, let's talk about how this pattern shows up in real life. Sometimes it looks like being highly self aware, but still unable to stay connected to yourself in hard moments. Sometimes it looks like overthinking every decision because you were taught to scan for what will keep everyone okay. Sometimes it looks like saying yes when your whole body means no. Sometimes it looks like being excellent in public and emotionally depleted in private. Sometimes it looks like constantly starting over with yourself because your life has become a cycle of pushing, crashing, recovering, and pushing again. Sometimes it looks like being the one everyone leans on while quietly feeling resentful, tired, or invisible. Sometimes it looks like knowing you need rest but feel uneasy the moment life gets quiet. Sometimes it looks like wanting softness but only trusting yourself when you are producing. And sometimes it looks like being unable to tell where your true self ends and your survival self begins. That is a painful place to live because a lot of women of color have been rewarded for their survival self, rewarded for being strong, rewarded for being accommodating, rewarded for holding a lot, rewarded for not needing much, rewarded for being able to manage, rewarded for making other people comfortable, rewarded for staying composed even when something inside is unraveling. So when healing asks you to slow down, tell the truth, set limits, disappoint people, rest, speak up, or choose yourself, it can feel deeply destabilizing. Not because it is wrong, but because it interrupts patterns that may have once helped you stay connected, protected, valued, or safe. And this is where deeper healing work matters because you are not just trying to change a habit, you're often trying to untangle years of conditioning. You're trying to separate your worth from your usefulness. You're trying to separate love from self abandonment. You're trying to separate love from self abandonment. You're trying to separate strength from overextension. You're trying to separate safety from silence. You are trying to remember who you are underneath adaptation. That is deep work, and it deserves more care than just be more disciplined. Because sometimes discipline without safety becomes another form of self violence. I'm going to repeat that again. Because sometimes discipline without safety becomes another form of self violence. Sometimes productivity becomes another way to avoid yourself. Sometimes productivity becomes another way to avoid yourself. Sometimes being the strong one becomes the very thing keeping you from being met. And this is why so many women keep feeling stuck. They're trying to force movement without first understanding the pattern. They're trying to think their way out of what their body has been living. They're trying to outperform the cost of what they have been carrying. And eventually, that stops working. Not because they're weak, because the body tells the truth. Sooner or later, it tells the truth about the pressure, the grief, the overfunctioning, the self silencing, the constant holding. And if you've been hearing that truth lately in the form of exhaustion, numbness, irritability, disconnection, inconsistency, or overwhelm, I want you to know that that does not make you broken. It may mean your system is asking for a different kind of relationship with yourself. I want you to pause here and speak I want to pause here and speak personally for a moment. I think one of the hardest things for high functioning women, especially women of color, is how invisible their struggle can become. Because when you are competent, thoughtful, responsible, and capable, people often see the output. They see what gets done. They see how composed you are. They see how much you can hold, but they don't always see the internal cost. They do not always see the pressure underneath the performance. They do not always see how much energy it takes to keep showing up when you feel tired, overloaded, disconnected, or emotionally full. And I think a lot of women start to miss their own pain because they're still functioning. They tell themselves, I'm fine, or other people have it worse, or I just need to get it together, or I should be able to handle this. And that kind of self talk can keep a woman disconnected from her truth for a very long time because the outside may still look successful, but inside, she may feel like she has not exhaled in years. So she may feel like she is always carrying pressure in her chest, in her thoughts, in her nervous system, in the way she moves through the day. She may feel like she is always managing something. And I think there's a particular pain in looking strong while quietly feeling while quietly feeling far from yourself. In being the one who handles things while not always feeling deeply held. In being praised for resilience while privately feeling exhausted by how much resilience has cost you. That is real. And I think many women of color have inherited versions of that reality. The expectation to keep going, the pressure to not collapse, the message that your pain should be contained, managed, spiritualized, or pushed through. The idea that strength is what makes you worthy. So when you start feeling stuck, sometimes what is really happening is that your old way of surviving is no longer enough for the woman who you are becoming. And instead of treating that like failure, I think we need to start treating it like truth, like holy transformation, like evidence that something deeper is asking for change. So, what begins to change when you start seeing this differently? First, you stop making your struggle mean that something is wrong with you. That alone is powerful because shame keeps women disconnected, but clarity creates movement. When you understand that your stuckness may be connected to survival, inherited pressure, self silencing, emotional labor, and a body that has learned to stay braced, you stop approaching yourself like a project to fix. You start approaching yourself like someone to understand. The second thing that changes is how you define growth. Growth stops being about proving that you can push harder. It starts becoming about creating enough safety to stay within yourself, enough honesty to name what is real, enough compassion to stop calling your patterns laziness when they may be exhaustion, enough self trust to notice when your life is asking for a different rhythm, enough courage to let go of the version of strength that only existed through exertion. Enough courage to let go of the version of strength that only existed through overextension. And then little things begins to change. And then little things begin to shift. You notice when your body's leaving you before your mind catches up. You notice where you automatically shift. You notice you notice where you automatically shrink. You notice where you confuse being needed with being loved. You notice where rest feels threatening. You notice where your voice gets quieter in the presence of disappointment. You notice where your life still revolves around managing everyone else's comfort. And from that place, change becomes more honest. Not faster for the sake of looking healed, not louder for the sake of performance, but deeper, more rooted, more sustainable. Because now you're not trying to build your next chapter from self-abandonment. Because now you're not trying to build your next chapter from self-abandonment. You're trying to build it from truth. And that is what starts to create real transformation. Not pretending the pattern is gone. Not waiting until you feel perfect. But learning how to stay connected to yourself while the old pattern loses power. That is the work. That is also where a woman begins to come home to herself. If this episode resonated and you're realizing that you have been calling your stuckness, if this episode resonated and you're realizing that what you have been calling stuckness may actually be a deeper survival pattern, this is exactly the kind of work I support inside the Sovereign System program. It is for the woman who is tired of performing strength while feeling overwhelmed underneath it all. The woman who wants to understand her nervous system, her patterns, and the deeper relationship between safety, self-connection, and change. You can learn more at herevolutionsolutions.com in the programs section. And whether you join me there or not, I hope this episode gives you permission to stop calling yourself the problem. Thank you for being here with me today. If this episode gave language to something you have been carrying, share with a woman who may need to hear that feeling stuck is not the same as being broken. And until next time, I want to leave you with this. You're not failing because force is no longer working. You're not behind because your healing needs a deeper kind of care. You're not too much for needing a way of living that does not require you to disappear from yourself. Talk soon. And until next time, I want to leave you with this. You're not failing because force is no longer working. You're not behind because your healing needs a deeper kind of care. You're not too much for needing a way of living that does not require you to disappear from yourself. Talk soon.